Every day before a single burger is sold, McDonald's collects more than $27 million in rent. It comes from its own restaurant's owners. In 2025, that added up to more than $10 billion. Money that comes in whether a location has a record year or an empty one. It's the most reliable income McDonald's has. The company owns the ground under tens of thousands of its restaurants, which makes it, quietly, one of the biggest landlords in the world. None of that was the plan. McDonald's was built by two brothers who just wanted to sell 15-cent hamburgers fast, and the man who turned it into a real estate empire was someone they never saw coming. Before there was an empire, there was a drive-in in San Bernardino, California. Dick and Mac McDonald opened it in 1940, and it did well. Car hops, a big menu, the usual roadside setup. By 1948, they were making good money and could have left it there. Instead, they shut it down for 3 months and rebuilt the whole idea. They fired the car hops. They cut the menu from 25 items to 9, and they redesigned the kitchen to work like a factory floor. One person grilling, one person dressing the buns, one person on the fryer, every motion planned. Dick sketched the layout in chalk on their tennis court and had the crew walk through it again and again until it was smooth. They called it the Speedy Service System, a 15-cent hamburger made and wrapped and handed over in about 30 seconds. Every fast food kitchen in the world still runs on that basic design. The brothers had invented the assembly line for food, and with it, the whole category we now call fast food. It didn't work right away. Profits fell at first. The car hops they'd let go came back to needle them, and regulars asked when they'd switch back to the old concept. Then the crowds came, families, kids with a quarter in their fist, and didn't stop coming. The McDonald's brothers had built something genuinely new. What they hadn't built was any way to make it bigger, and the man who would do that for them was, at that moment, still driving around the country selling milkshake machines. Ray Kroc was 52 years old and selling a 5-spindle mixer called the multi-mixer, the kind of unglamorous road job that wears a man down. Sometime around 1954, he noticed something odd in his own sales numbers. A single hamburger stand in San Bernardino was running 8 of his machines at once, 40 milkshakes going at a time, and Kroc couldn't understand why one restaurant would need that kind of volume. So he drove out to see it for himself. What he found stopped him. One restaurant was doing the business of 10. There were no car hops and no waiting. Customers walked up to a window, got their food in under a minute, and left. Kroc had spent decades in and out of American kitchens, and he'd never seen anything move like that. And the brothers weren't hiding any of it. They'd already tried franchising the system themselves, licensed a handful of copies around California and Arizona, then lost interest in pushing it further. One great restaurant had made them rich and comfortable, and for them, that was enough. It was not enough for Ray Kroc. He talked Dick and Mac into letting him franchise the system nationally. And in 1955, he opened the first restaurant of his own operation in Des Plaines, Illinois, and started signing up owners across the Midwest. There was just one problem. Kroc's cut of each new restaurant was tiny, and it very nearly ruined him. Kroc's cut of every franchise was 1.9% of its sales, and of that, 0.5% went to the brothers in California under the original deal, leaving him with about 1.5%. Out of that sliver came salaries, advertising, travel, everything it took to build a national chain. It wasn't enough. Kroc drew almost no salary for years and mortgaged his house to keep going. Banks looked at a business built on 15-cent hamburgers and saw nothing they could lend against. A royalty check isn't a collateral. So, by the mid-1950s, Kroc was in his 50s, deep in debt, and running a chain that was growing fast and still couldn't pay him. Franchises were opening restaurants and doing brisk business. Kroc couldn't take a real wage. Something in the structure was broken. The man who would fix it was already in the building. Harry Sonneborn came out of a soft-serve chain called Tasty Freeze, and Kroc brought him on in 1955 to sort out the money. Sonneborn didn't much care about hamburgers. He cared about the balance sheet, and he spotted the flaw almost immediately. Royalties on burger sales were thin and unpredictable. Land was the opposite, permanent, and something a bank would actually lend against. So his idea, which almost nobody in franchising was doing at the time, was this. McDonald's itself would take control of the site for every new restaurant, buying it or signing a long-term lease, and then hand the finished building to the franchise wrapped in a sublease. The franchise would pay a markup, as much as 40% above McDonald's own cost, or 5% of the restaurant's sales, whichever came out higher. In 1956, Sonneborn set up a separate company to run it. He called it the Franchise Realty Corporation. Part of the genius was timing. Rent came in the moment a franchise signed, before the store had sold anything. But the deeper part was the spread. McDonald's cost on a location barely moved. They were locked onto a long-term mortgage. The rent it charged went up every year, with inflation and with the franchisee's sales. Its cost stayed flat, its income climbed, and that gap got wider automatically, decade after decade. Sonneborn later put it in a sentence that outlived him. "We are not technically in the food business, we are in the real estate business. The only reason we sell 15-cent hamburgers is because they are the greatest producer of revenue from which our tenants can pay us our rent." Kroc had built a chain of hamburger stands. Sonneborn had turned it into a real estate company that happened to serve lunch. There was only one thing in the way. The two brothers in California still owned the name on every sign. By the end of the 1950s, Kroc wanted the McDonald name entirely to himself. In 1961, he offered to buy the brothers out. Asked for a number, Dick and Mac gave him one, $2.7 million, split between them. Kroc, by his own account, was staggered. He later said he dropped the phone and joked he felt like jumping out of his office window. He asked to pay it over time. The brothers refused. Cash all at once or no deal. He found the money with Sonneborn's help and paid it. Each brother walked away with about $1 million after taxes. But according to the McDonald's family, there was a second half of the agreement that never made it onto paper. A handshake promised that the brothers would keep collecting 0.5% of the company's sales forever. Kroc's lawyers, the family says, warned that a perpetual royalty in the contract would make the deal impossible to finance. So it stayed a handshake. It's a disputed story, and it may be more legend than fact. It's not in Kroc's memoir, and the brothers never pressed it in public. But the outcome isn't in dispute. Not a dollar of that royalty was ever paid. As McDonald's grew into a company worth tens of billions, the men who built the entire system got the number they'd named in 1961, and nothing after it. There was one last turn. The deal meant the brothers had to give up the McDonald's name for their own original restaurant, so they renamed it the Big M. Then Kroc opened a company-owned McDonald's just up the road. Within a few years, the Big M closed for good. By 1965, Sonneborn's model had done what the burgers alone never could. It made McDonald's fundable. Rent gave the bank something solid to lend against, and the growth that once nearly bankrupted Kroc turned into an avalanche. In April, the company went public at $22.50 a share. The stock hit $30 the first day and $50 by the end of the month, and it made Ray Kroc and Harry Sonneborn rich. Kroc marked the occasion by buying a 200-acre ranch. None of that could have happened on a 1.9% royalty. It happened because Sonneborn had turned a hamburger stand into a landlord. But Sonneborn didn't last either. In 1967, he and Kroc fell out over how fast to grow. Sonneborn was sure a recession was coming and wanted to stop building. Kroc wanted more. And as chief executive, Kroc had the final say. Sonneborn resigned. On his way out, convinced the company was heading for trouble, he sold his entire stake for about $3 million. The recession never came. Had he held that stock, it would have been worth $100 million within a decade, and close to $1 billion by the end of his life. The financial wizard had made the worst financial call of his career, and by some accounts, he never ate at McDonald's again. Only Kroc was left. The brother's name was on every sign in the country, but Kroc was the one the world would remember as the founder. And what Sonneborn started became one of the largest and most valuable property portfolios on Earth. By the end of 2025, there were 45,356 McDonald's restaurants in more than 100 countries, and about 95% of them weren't run by McDonald's at all. They were run by independent franchisees. On paper, that makes McDonald's sound like a company that mostly stands back and lets small business owners work, but it doesn't. In its major markets, McDonald's owns roughly 56% of the land under its restaurants and about 80% of the buildings. Worldwide, it's closer to 45% of the land and 70% of the buildings. Either way, the company is the landlord to the people who run its stores, and the rent is the best business it has. In 2025, McDonald's collected more than $10 billion of it, more than it earned in royalties on the food itself. That money comes in regardless of how any single restaurant performed, at a profit margin that runs above 80%. Set that against the burger, thin margins, high costs, competition on every corner. One side of the business fights over the price of a Coke. The other just cashes the rent check. So, every new franchisee who signs on isn't only buying the right of the Golden Arches, they're signing a lease. Miss enough payments or fall out of step with the head office and the lease can be pulled, and the restaurant sitting on top of it goes with it. The operators feel like owners. On McDonald's books, they're tenants. There's a claim that gets repeated about McDonald's that it's one of the biggest landowners on earth, bigger than almost anyone, the Catholic Church included. It isn't, not even close. The largest private landowner in America is the Emerson family, with about 2.4 million acres of timberland. The Catholic Church holds something of the order of 177 million acres worldwide. McDonald's owns roughly 50,000, a rounding error next to either of them. But an acre is not an acre. The families and institutions at the top of those lists own forest and ranch and open country, millions of acres in places where each one is worth very little. What McDonald's owns is the reverse, barely any land, almost all of it on the busiest corner of the busiest road in town. The corners were the whole point. Sonneborn and Kroc bought them cheap in the 1950s and 60s, while post-war America was still building out its highways and its suburbs. They didn't need to predict which corners would boom. They just had to be early and then never sell. A parcel bought at the edge of town in 1958 on a road that barely existed yet sat there for 60 years while the town grew out to meet it. Until the quiet corner was a signalized intersection with traffic in every direction. These days, McDonald's picks its corners with traffic models and satellite data. But the principle hasn't changed since Sonneborn. Own the intersection and let the tenant sell the burgers. And those corners are worth far more than the company's own books admit, because McDonald's records its property at what it paid, often decades ago. The real estate sits on the balance sheet at around $30 billion. When the investment firm Macquarie tried to estimate what it's actually worth today, they came out closer to $120 billion. Real estate analysts have called it the most valuable commercial property portfolio in the world. Valuable, not large, assembled one corner at a time by a company most people still think of as a place that sells fries. A timber baron owns a mountain nobody drives past. McDonald's owns the exit ramp. So, which is it? A restaurant company that happens to own a lot of land, or a landlord that happens to sell burgers to cover the mortgage? The brothers who invented the system got a number they named themselves in 1961. And if the family is right, a promise that was never kept. The salesman who took it national nearly went broke before he ever got rich. And the finance man history barely remembers, Harry Sonneborn, is the one who saw where the money was actually hiding, under the parking lot, not on the grill. McDonald's still calls itself a restaurant company. The rent checks say something else. Every empire leaves a ledger behind. Subscribe to see the next one. Until next time, this is The Wealth Ledger.